All right, welcome in, everyone. We're diving into some potentially choppy waters today.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
So, someone sent us this audio clip from a YouTube channel, Dose of Misandry.
Okay, the name itself certainly grabs your attention.
Yeah, and the creator, who goes by BDJ, is part of the MGTOW community.
MGTOW.
Yeah, men going their own way. And basically, they're alleging systemic discrimination against men, specifically in family courts.
Right.
And they use this really specific example from a Texas Bar Association event to try and prove their point. So, ready to take the plunge?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the core of DDJ's argument hinges on this presentation by a Texas County prosecutor, Leslie Levy.
A prosecutor giving a presentation. What was the context?
So it was at a continuing legal education course, a CLE.
Oh, those are pretty standard for lawyers, right? To
Yeah,
keep their licenses current.
exactly. But DDJ is claiming that this particular presentation was, well, let's just say a little concerning.
I'm all ears.
So Levy's topic was protective orders in divorce cases. And what DDJ pulls out is her seemingly advising attorneys to consider using these orders as leverage in negotiations, even if there's no real threat of violence.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. And that's where DDJ claims Levy is encouraging attorneys to basically weaponize protective orders.
That's a pretty serious accusation. What else does DJ say?
Well, they also claim that Levy is pushing for these orders to be filed in civil court to pursuing criminal charges, which would, go through her office.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction. In a criminal case, the burden of proof is much higher. The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a law was broken. And the consequences for the accused can be severe fines, imprisonment, you name it.
Right. It's no joke. But in a civil case, it's a lower burden of proof. It's what's called a preponderance of the evidence standard. And the outcome usually involves financial compensation or court orders, like the protective orders we're talking about.
So DDJ is suggesting that Levy is deliberately steering things toward this lower burden of proof in civil court, potentially putting men at a disadvantage.
Exactly. And they take it even further, accusing Levy of either intentionally obstructing the prosecution of domestic violence cases,
Wow.
or even more seriously, essentially condoning false accusations for profit. Pretty heavy stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. But how does DDJ even get there? What evidence do they present?
Well, they cite specific legal statutes from the Texas Penal Code, trying to build a case that Levy's actions could be considered criminal. They bring up laws related to things like making false police reports, exploitation of children, abuse of official capacity. It gets pretty dense.
Yeah, complex legal argument indeed. And it's important to remember we're only hearing one side of it through DDJ's interpretation.
Right. Context is key. But it's clear that DDJ is trying to paint a picture of a system that's biased against men, using Levy's presentation as, like, the smoking gun. And get this, they actually call on other MGTOW men to avoid marriage and relationships altogether.
To escape this perceived systemic discrimination.
Exactly. Pretty strong call to action, right?
It is. Makes you think about individual agency versus societal pressures. Does withdrawing truly empower someone, or does it isolate them further? And what about the broader societal implications? DDJ's argument taps into a growing trend we're seeing, with marriage rates declining and these online communities like MGTOW gaining more traction.
So it's not just a legal argument, it's a social commentary, a reflection of these shifting attitudes towards relationships and traditional gender roles.
Absolutely. It's a very layered issue.
Yeah. I mean, DDJ is presenting this case as, like, concrete proof of a system rigged against men. But is it possible to reconcile that perspective with the reality that domestic violence is a very real issue, affecting many people regardless of gender?
That's a crucial point. It's a complex and sensitive issue, and it's really important to avoid generalizations. While false accusations do happen, we can't dismiss the very real struggles that many victims of domestic violence face. The legal system has to grapple with balancing the need to protect victims while also ensuring that the rights of the accused are upheld.
Right. It's a delicate balance for sure.
It is.
And, DDJ drops another bombshell in the video.
Ugh.
Lay it on me.
They claim that Livy's presentation wasn't just some, rogue act, but was actually approved
Approved by?
by both the Williamson County Bar Association, where it took place, and even the Texas State Bar.
If those claims are accurate, that adds another layer to this whole situation.
Right. It raises questions about the organizations involved and their role in potentially perpetuating these alleged biases.
Definitely something to consider.
And then DDJ goes on to suggest that Levy might be deliberately avoiding having these protective orders filed through her office as criminal cases. because, that will require her to inform individuals of their Fifth Amendment rights. So they're implying that by pushing for civil court filings, she's sidestepping these constitutional protections.
That seemed to be suggesting. But, it's also important to understand that the Fifth Amendment protects against self-incrimination in criminal
Right,
proceedings.
it's specific to that context.
Exactly. So DDJ is suggesting that Levy might be trying to avoid triggering those protections by keeping things in the civil realm. But, the legal system has safeguards in place to prevent abuse, and both civil and criminal courts operate within a framework designed to uphold due process rights.
That's a good point. So even in a civil case, there are still procedures in place to ensure a fair hearing.
Exactly. Both parties have the opportunity to present evidence, call witnesses, be represented by legal counsel.
Right, it's not a free-for-all.
Not at all. And DDJ also brings up other rights guaranteed by the Sixth and Eighth Amendments, like the right to a jury trial, the right to confront witnesses, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. And they argue that men are denied these rights in family court and Title IX's proceedings, putting them at a significant disadvantage.
That's a perspective we often hear from groups like MGTOW, this idea that the family court system is inherently biased against men. But it's important to remember that family court is complex, often emotionally charged. The goal is to find resolutions that protect the well-being of all parties involved, especially children.
Right? It's not just about winning or losing.
No, it's about finding solutions that are in the best interests of everyone involved.
Exactly. And judges have a difficult job weighing evidence, considering individual circumstances, making decisions that are often subjective and open to interpretation.
Absolutely, it's not black and white.
Not at all. And then DDJ even goes so far as to say that if Levy were genuinely concerned about domestic violence, she'd encourage reporting these incidents to law enforcement
Instead
of, seemingly advising against it. And they claim that by doing so, she's either obstructing justice or tacitly acknowledging that the accusations are fabricated. Kind of a leap, don't you think?
It's definitely a provocative interpretation. But we have to be careful about making assumptions about someone's motives based on limited information. We're only hearing one side of this story filtered through DDJ's very particular lens.
Exactly. We're missing crucial context. Like, we don't have Levy's full presentation, her reasoning behind the statements DDJ pulls out. It's like trying to understand a book by reading a couple sentences.
It's a good analogy. We need the full picture to really make a fair assessment.
Right. And speaking of, DDJ circles back to the Texas Penal Code.
They're really going in on this, huh?
They are. This time, they bring up a section on hindering apprehension or prosecution. They're claiming Levy's actions could potentially fall under this statute. It's like they're building a legal case against her right in front of us.
It's definitely an attempt to add weight to their accusations. But again, legal statutes are complex. Interpreting them accurately requires expertise. We're not legal professionals, and DDJ's analysis should be taken with a grain of salt.
Right, right. We should be cautious about accepting their interpretation as fact.
Exactly. It's always best to consult with legal professionals for accurate information on these matters.
Always good advice. And DDJ keeps going, bringing up Texas Penal Code 32.53.
What's that one about?
It deals with exploitation of a child. They're arguing that if these domestic violence allegations are fabricated, then encouraging their use to gain custody of children could constitute a crime.
Oh, wow. That's a disturbing aspect of this whole situation. The potential for the legal system to be misused in custody disputes is a serious concern. And if there's any truth to DDJ's allegations, it raises some significant ethical and legal questions.
Yeah, no doubt. It seems like DDJ is trying to hit on all cylinders here, claiming that whether Levy is knowingly obstructing justice or pushing false accusations, she's abusing her authority as a prosecutor, which, of course, they point out is also a crime under Texas law.
They're trying to connect all the dots, building this case that Levy's actions are not only unethical, but potentially illegal.
Right. But again, it's important to remember that we're only hearing one side of the story, and it's presented in a way designed to be persuasive to those who already believe in this systemic bias against men.
It's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric.
Totally. So what do you think? Is this just a case of someone with an axe to grind? Or is there something more substantial to DDJ's claims?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've been presented with a lot of information here. Legal statutes, interpretations. But we need to approach it all with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Right. We can't just accept these claims at face value.
Absolutely not.
We need to dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and see if there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Exactly. And that's what we'll continue to do as we move forward with this deep dive. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this complex and fascinating case.
I think it's safe to say we're in for a wild ride.
Buckle up. It's really interesting, how this source, while it's focused on this alleged discrimination against men, kind of accidentally reveals something really important about how information spreads online these days.
Yeah, I see that. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in a narrative when it's presented, with such conviction, and it seems like there's evidence.
Right, but is DDJ giving us the whole picture here, or is this
Yeah.
just one very carefully crafted angle?
Exactly. That's the question. I mean, this is just one person's interpretation, right? Filtered through their own beliefs and experiences.
Exactly. And it raises some interesting questions, don't you think, about media literacy and how we're all responsible for being, critical consumers of information, especially online.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you think about those echo chambers, Like if you're already kind of inclined to believe something, you're way more likely to just accept information that confirms those beliefs,
Right.
even if it's not the whole story.
Absolutely. It's like our own biases,
Yeah.
feeding us what we want to hear.
Right, exactly. And with those algorithms feeding us content based on our past behavior, it's just easier than ever to get stuck in those echo chambers and miss out on other points of view.
It's almost like we're all living in our own little curated realities.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Only seeing what we already agree with.
So how do we break free from that?
Hmm.
Develop those critical thinking skills we need to navigate this crazy information landscape.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, I think the big part of it is being aware of our own biases. I mean, we all have them. It's natural.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But recognizing them, that's got to be the first step.
Exactly, and being willing to, challenge them.
So it's not about, like, eliminating bias completely.
No, no, not at all.
It's more about acknowledging it and then actively seeking out different perspectives, right?
Right.
To broaden our understanding.
Exactly. And that means, being willing to listen to viewpoints that might make us uncomfortable, even if we ultimately disagree.
Yeah, having those tough conversations.
Right. Engaging with ideas that push us out of our comfort zones
Mm.
and being open to the possibility that, maybe we're wrong about something.
For sure. And in this case, it's important to consider, the perspectives of those who might have had different experiences within the family court system.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, women who've been victims of domestic violence
Mhm.
and have had to rely on protective orders for their safety. We can't generalize about the potential for misuse because they serve a vital purpose in so many cases.
Right. It's all about nuance.
It is. And we have to remember that the legal system is always evolving. There are always debates about how to balance the rights of all parties involved. And it's just a really complex issue.
It is. Another thing that struck me in DDJ's video was the emphasis on the emotional impact of these legal battles.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they talk about the fear, the frustration, that feeling of being trapped in a system that seems rigged against them. And even if we don't necessarily agree with their conclusions, I think it's important to acknowledge that emotional toll these experiences can take on people, you know?
Absolutely. Regardless of the legal arguments or who's right or wrong, there's a human element to these cases that we can't just ignore. These are people's lives.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to, approach these conversations with empathy and recognize that there are always multiple layers of complexity at play.
It is. And that brings us to another important aspect of this whole deep dive, understanding the MTTOW movement itself.
Ah, yes.
We've mentioned it, but for those who might not be familiar, can you kind of break down what MTTOW is and what they stand for?
Of course. So MGTOW stands for Men Going Their Own Way. And it's basically an online community, a very loose movement, I'd say, centered around this belief that men are systematically disadvantaged in society,
In what ways?
particularly when it comes to relationships, marriage, and family law. And you're right, DDJ is very clearly drawing on that ideology, framing this whole situation with Leslie Levy as, an example of that injustice they believe men face all the time.
Right.
And it's important to remember that, like any online community, there's a whole range of beliefs and viewpoints within MGTOW. Some men might just identify with the idea of focusing on self-improvement and pursuing their own goals,
Yeah, okay.
while others hold more extreme views that advocate for complete separation from women and, traditional societal structures.
Right, so it can kind of be a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, for sure. And critics of MGTOW often point to that potential for it to become a breeding ground for, harmful attitudes toward women.
That makes sense.
They argue that it promotes this victimhood mentality that ignores the very real issues of sexism and violence that women still face.
Hmm. It's a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. So it's important to approach MGTOW with a critical eye, avoid those generalizations.
Right. Not everyone who identifies with the movement holds those extreme views.
Exactly. It's about having nuanced conversations that address the concerns some men might have while also challenging harmful ideologies.
I think that's a really important point. It's about finding that balance, understanding the perspectives that fuel these movements, while also being critical of the potential for them to be, hijacked by extremism or hateful rhetoric.
Yeah, finding that middle ground.
Right. And it reminds me of the importance of being media literate, being able to discern credible information from biased or misleading content.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get swept up in a narrative that just confirms what we already believe, but we have to be willing to question those beliefs and consider other viewpoints.
Exactly. It's about developing those critical thinking skills,
Yeah.
to analyze information, evaluate sources, and form our own informed opinions.
For sure. Speaking of critical thinking, DDJ's call to action for MGTOW men to completely avoid marriage and relationships, it raises some interesting questions, I think, about personal responsibility and the role of individual choice versus societal influence. It's like they're saying, if the system is rigged, the only solution is to opt out entirely. But does that actually address the underlying issues? Or does it just make things worse?
That's a really good point. It really gets to the heart of that whole nature versus nurture debate.
Right, like how much of our behavior is shaped by the systems we're born into and how much is just our own choices?
Exactly. It's this complex interplay, and it's hard to separate those influences sometimes.
It really is. It's like, trying to untangle a really complicated knot.
It is.
It makes you wonder if there's a middle ground, between completely withdrawing and just accepting things the way they are. Like, is it possible to work within those systems to create change, even if they are flawed?
That's where the idea of agency comes in, I think.
Agency.
Yeah, like even if we acknowledge that societal structures influence us, we still have the power to make choices.
To push back.
Right. To challenge those structures, advocate for change. It might not be easy. It might not feel like we're making a difference, but I think it's crucial to believe in that possibility of creating a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, to believe that things can get better.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really powerful message to take away from this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Even in the face of what feels like injustice, we have the capacity to choose how we respond, to challenge those systems, to work toward creating something better.
It's about taking back that control.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're not powerless, that we can be agents of change in our own lives and in the world around us.
So, we've spent a lot of time really getting into DDJ's claims and understanding the whole MGTOW perspective, but I kind of want to go back to the core of this case.
Okay, yeah.
Those protective orders that DDJ was so worried about, like, what exactly are they? How do they work in the legal system? I think it'd be helpful to break it down for those of us who, aren't lawyers.
Yeah, for sure. It could be really easy to get lost in all the legal jargon, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So basically, a protective order, sometimes called a restraining order, it's a legal document issued by a court. And it's designed to protect someone from harassment, threats, violence, any harmful actions by another person.
Okay, so it's kind of like a legal shield.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries.
Exactly, yeah. A layer of protection.
Patient who filed for the order.
Right. Protective orders can have a lot of different restrictions.
Right.
Like prohibiting the respondent from contacting the petitioner, whether it's directly or indirectly.
Oh, okay.
It can also set a distance they have to maintain from the petitioner's home, work, their kid's school, and sometimes it can even prohibit them from having firearms.
Wow, so it can get pretty serious.
It can, yeah. It all depends on the situation, of course.
Right. Now, DDJ was really concerned about these being used in divorce cases specifically, suggesting they could be like a weapon to get an advantage.
In custody battles, financial stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Is that a legitimate concern, or is it just, an exaggeration?
I mean, it's a valid point. Protective orders, they're meant to prevent harm, ensure safety, but there's always that potential for misuse.
Right.
Especially in situations that are already emotionally charged, like a divorce.
It's kind of like any tool, right? Something meant for good can be twisted.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you think about how the legal system tries to balance protecting potential victims, but also making sure the accused aren't unfairly targeted.
Right. It's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah, no easy answers there.
And in this specific case, DDJ claimed that Levy was encouraging attorneys to file these protective orders in civil court instead of going for criminal charges. What's the difference there? Why would it matter which route they choose?
So that's a really important distinction. In a criminal case, it's the state that brings charges, representing the public interest, saying someone broke the law.
Okay.
The burden of proof is really high, beyond the reasonable doubt, which we talked about before. And the consequences, like I said, can be serious. Fines, imprisonment, all that.
So much higher stakes for the person accused.
Exactly. But in a civil case, it's one private party, the plaintiff, suing another, the defendant, claiming some kind of harm or violation of their rights.
Got it.
And the burden of proof is lower in a civil case. More about which side's version of events is more convincing,
Okay.
And the outcome usually involves money or court orders like those protective orders.
So civil is more about resolving a dispute, while criminal is about punishment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, DDJ seems to be saying that Levy's advice to file in civil court is like a sneaky tactic.
To avoid due process.
Right, or to make it easier to get that protective order. But both civil and criminal courts have procedures to ensure things are fair, that individual rights are protected.
So even in a civil case, the person accused still has a chance to defend themselves, right?
Absolutely. Due process applies to both civil and criminal proceedings. The specifics might differ, but the idea is to make sure everyone has a fair chance to be heard, that decisions are based on evidence, not just one person's word against another's.
It's so important to have access to reliable information and to get advice from legal professionals when you're dealing with something like this.
Oh, absolutely. Legal stuff can be so complicated. Trying to navigate it without an expert is like sailing without a map.
Yeah, you're going to get lost.
Exactly.
It really highlights how complex the legal system is and how important it is to get professional help when you need it.
Couldn't agree more. There are so many details that can make all the difference in a case.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been enlightening, seeing how the legal system works and how these protective orders can be used for good or, not so good.
That's like peeling back the layers of an onion. The system that's constantly changing, trying to deal with these tough issues.
Yeah, good analogy.
And, while we focus on this specific case and what DDJ was claiming, it's important to remember these issues are everywhere.
Right. It's bigger than just this one example.
Exactly.
And behind all the legal arguments and the online debates, there are real people, whose lives are being affected by this stuff.
It's so true. And the emotional stakes are high. We have to approach these conversations with sensitivity, with empathy.
Absolutely. Whether we're talking about domestic violence or false accusations or just the complexities of family court, we have to remember these aren't just abstract concepts. They're real-life situations affecting individuals, families, communities.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope everyone listening has a better understanding of the issues we talked about,
Yeah.
the challenges of the legal system, and the importance of approaching these conversations with empathy, with critical thinking, and a willingness to listen to different viewpoints.
That's what it's all about.
It is. And remember, this is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. There's always more to learn, more to consider, and more ways to get involved in these conversations.
So this deep dive, it's been a journey, right? Legal complexities, emotional appeals, calls for change. We've explored claims of systemic discrimination, looked at how information spreads online, and talked about our responsibility to be informed, to think critically, and to be compassionate.
And I think as we move forward from this, we should take these insights with us. Strive to be critical thinkers, empathetic listeners, and advocates for a more just and equitable world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.